last battle between Bhima and Duryodhana. But you can see that the traditions persisted, and many of you, I'm sure, would know that there are many traditional gymnasiums where you can learn wrestling, and maybe this is in fact one reason why Indians are doing so well in wrestling at the Olympics and other international arenas, because this tradition has been quite persistent in India. You can see this proud wrestler here who is going to demonstrate wrestling with clubs. So all these techniques and many more, I do not have time, for example, to speak on Kalaripayattu, the martial arts of Kerala, were regarded as an essential part of education. They were not. Then there is another source, which is 64 arts. In addition to this, accomplished, cultured people, refined people, it was a measure actually of refinement and culture, were supposed to master 64 arts. I'm not even going to read them out. You can just pick one or two at random. And this list is from the Kama Sutra, in fact. But it is something totally endless and quite mind-boggling. And it's difficult to believe that someone could have mastered all of these. But anyway, this is what the text tells us. So it includes almost every possible human activity as far as I can see, including of course again physical, the techniques of wrestling, fighting, and so on, but also a lot of intellectual exercises. For example, look at this number 27, solution of riddles, enigmas, covert speeches, that is to say coded speech, verbal puzzles, what today we would call brain teasers, and enigmatical questions. So there's a lot of insistence, on developing all mental faculties. Look at this one, for instance, the art of understanding writing in cipher, again coded writing, which was used extensively in ancient India, and the writing of words in a peculiar way. There are some ways to sometimes corroborate such evidence. For example, I stumbled in the Saraswati Mahal Library of Tanjavur on a manuscript which was shown to us by the curator. It's a Sanskrit manuscript, and if you read it in the normal way, it's an abridged version of the Mahabharata. But if you read it starting from the last letter and backward, it is the Ramayana. It sounds impossible, but it is true, and it was an art, and it is listed somewhere among those 64 arts. If you read it backward, it is the number 40? 45, the art of speaking by changing the form of words. Some speak by changing the beginning and end of words, others by adding unnecessary letters between every syllable of a word, and so on. This is slightly different. It's a way to speak in a confused way so that others will not understand you. In fact, in France we had one such, it was called Javanese, I think. We had one such way of confusing speech. But these are some of the techniques which did exist. We can read this one just and then we'll pass on because this is just too vast. Let us read the first one. Mental exercises such as completing stanzas or verses and receiving a part of them, or supplying 1, 2, or 3 lines when the remaining lines are given indiscriminately from different verses so as to make the whole an entire verse with regard to its meaning, or arranging the words of a consonant, or leaving them out altogether, etc., etc., etc. So you can see the number of techniques that a cultured person was supposed to master. Not only that, but all kinds of crafts, all kinds of arts, and from even the making of artificial flowers, which is therefore not a new thing in India. So we now jump, and this is the last part of my presentation, on the pre-colonial times, because I am exceptionally leaving ancient India to show you that there is a continuity all the way to the time when the British come and finally impose their system of education. And we have very important testimonies, beginning the earliest one from an Italian, I think he was Italian, if I'm not mistaken, traveler to India, 1623, and he writes, "The Indians are particularly anxious and attentive to instruct their children to read and to write. Education with them is an early and important business in every family. Many of their women are taught to read and write." This is interesting, we'll come back to this. "The Brahmins are generally the schoolmasters, but any of the castes may and often do practice teaching. The children are instructed without violence and by a process peculiarly simple. The pupils are the monitors of each other." That is to say, the students actually teach each other. It's not just the teacher. "And the characters are traced with a rod or the finger on the sand. Reading and writing are acquired at the same time and by the same process." So this is a very important and quite faithful testimony as far as we can see. We jump to the next century, and there is a Jesuit father from Austria who writes, "A schoolmaster in Malabar," that's of course a part of Kerala, "receives every 2 months from each of his pupils for the instruction given them 2 fanan or panam." Now 2 panam, I do not really know the exact equivalent, but it would be in any case much less than 1 rupee. Some do not pay in money but give him a certain quantity of rice so that his expenses become very easy to the parents. There are some teachers who instruct children without any fee and are paid by the overseers of the temple or by the chief of the caste. So you see how, and this is actually quite the same scenario as we saw in ancient India, that education was basically regarded as something that should be free from the point of view of the student. And it was financed in various ways. When the pupils have made tolerable progress in writing, they are admitted into certain schools called Yuthupalli, where they begin to write on palm leaves. So this is the more advanced education, which when several of them are stitched together and fastened between 2 boards form a grantha, that is an Indian book, a manuscript. So this is also faithful accounts. Then we move to British reports, and those British reports are very interesting because they predate Macaulay's indictment I should say, by several decades. And one, William Adam in particular, wrote 3 major reports which are available, where he gives not only observations like what we're going to read, but statistics on what was the actual condition of education in the regions where the British were penetrating. So therefore, first of all, the Bengal presidency, the Madras presidency, and a little bit on the west also. And these reports were soon forgotten by the British themselves. They were rediscovered by a Gandhian scholar known as Dharampal, who wrote an important book called The Beautiful Tree, which is available freely on the internet, where you can find summaries of these reports and a lot of statistics on the condition of education by the time the British reached India. So Adam notes that the desire to give education to their male children must be deeply seated in the minds of parents, even of the humblest classes. He notes, and this is of course quite staggering, 1 to 1.5 lakh village schools in Bengal and Bihar up to 1830. So that's 1 village school for every 63 children in average. So therefore a very extensive system, but totally decentralized. It's not as if those schools, have an apex body. There is no such thing. They are quite independent, but this is obviously in line with the older traditions. Then these are the basic learning. Today we would call them primary or secondary schools, but after this there are institutions of higher learning, and he counts 100 of them in each district of Bengal. Madras Collectorate had 322 native schools and colleges in 1822. So that's also quite a bit. That's only for Madras Collectorate. If I take Coimbatore, which is towards the Western Ghats, 763 schools with a total of over 8,000 students. So of course we can see that the schools have few students on average. They are small, but they exist. And 173 institutions of higher learning, also with few students each. But nevertheless, they are available for those who want. The statistics given by William Adam are the following. Students are there from all four castes, and this is important because it gives the lie to a frequent colonial statement that whatever education existed in India was exclusively for the Brahmins, not for the other castes, or maybe the Kshatriyas, but no others. And very interestingly, what we find in those village schools is just the opposite. Brahmins 12%, Vaishyas 3.5%. Why so little? Because the Vaishyas, the traders, wanted their children to be quickly trained in the family business. This is my interpretation. So they would give more like home training, or even maybe directly in the business the child, and would not send him or her possibly to the school. Shudras 8% and others 6.5%. So therefore it is not as if the lowest castes were debarred from education, at least not at the village level. In Coimbatore and Madurai region, 1% of Shudra and low caste girls, only 1%. But in other regions, like in Malabar, in Kerala, 15% were girls. So the girls, you see, there was no bar against girls attending schools. In fact, it is the upper caste girls who were most absent from such schools, because they were educated at home. And this is one rare depiction we have of such a school in the 19th century. This is actually for Muslim students, obviously, in Agra, 1871. But probably the Hindu schools would have been something comparable to this kind of setting. And I want to read out the testimony of a member of the Council of the Bombay Presidency in 1820. So this is 15 years